Exactly 1 month ago, on November 4th, a woman took her little son, a couple years old, to the zoo in Pittsburgh. And they were looking at the animals that came to the cage of the painted African dogs. And she propped her son up on the wall. And her son, as a normal, frisky 2-year-old, fell over the wall, fell into the painted African dogs, and was either killed by the fall or devoured in part by the dogs. This happened in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And it throws us off to read a story like that. Perhaps some of you read this account. The terror of the natural world, you might say. The way in which the natural world operates. For the beautiful African painted dogs, this was another piece of food. This was part of what they expected. This is part of what they live on, the body of this little boy. And it is a terror that the people who listened or who read the account of the prophet Isaiah would have understood perfectly. So when Isaiah the prophet says, on this holy mountain, you will have things like the lamb and the leopard will lie down with the kid, the little goat. The calf and the lion shall browse together with a little child to guide them. The cow and the bear shall be neighbors. This was about as improbable as anything could be. These were people who were closer to nature. They didn't get their sense of what nature is like from a movie from Walt Disney Studios or from a travel log on television. They saw it day to day. They saw lambs that had been torn apart by wolves and so forth. They saw people being torn apart by other people. And so they were more close to the terror of daily life, the terror of the natural world, which we've kind of had a more anesthetized and sanitized version of provided to us. And so what the prophet Isaiah is talking about here is something that's hard for them to imagine. It's almost impossible for them to imagine a shoot springing forth from Jesse's stem. In other words, somebody being born eventually in Jesse's lineage, one of his grandchildren, one of his great-grandchildren, who would be a leader of people, a king, if you wish, who would actually care, first of all, for the poor and those who have been taken advantage of, and will go after the scallywags who are taking advantage of them all the time. It was virtually impossible for the people to imagine this. Only God could bring this forth. This would have to be a reversal of absolutely everything that they experienced. It's amazing stuff. And it's interesting, isn't it, that the characteristics of this great leader who is going to burst forth from Jesse's family is going to be one who's going to have the Lord resting upon him and exhibit the spirit of wisdom and understanding, counsel and strength, knowledge and fear of the Lord, reminiscent of what for us? The gifts of the Holy Spirit. He would have to be possessed by God in order to be that kind of ruler. It was that inconceivable for them. It's inconceivable for us to imagine this kind of situation. maybe it's not something that we can grok with the same kind of immediacy as the people to whom Isaiah was originally speaking. I wonder how we would rewrite this today. Would we say, on that day when the Lord comes, natural enemies, like brothers and sisters, will start speaking to each other kindly, that married couples will settle their differences amicably and remain married rather than entering into divorce. On that day, we will elect somebody to office who's not beholding to political interests and the wealthy, but will actually care about people like the 99% who have nobody to really watch over them, and perhaps even especially the lower 10% who are completely lost and who are victims not of lions and bears, but bankers and business people and lawyers. It's hard for us to even imagine that in our own time. And yet this is what the promise that Isaiah puts forth. So what do? Do we just wait for it? Do we just wait for the day when people start treating each other less cruelly, where they take less advantage of one another, where people begin to speak kindly with one another? Do we just sit back and say prayers and say, God, make it happen, although I can't imagine it? Or do we go back and remember the gifts of the Holy Spirit and say, if those are gifts that were shared to us at our confirmation as a gift of the Spirit, then maybe what God is indicating to us, that at least we hold some responsibility in our age to bring out, at least to some degree, the qualities that the prophet mentions here. That maybe what God is saying is, I've given you the gifts of the Spirit so that at least you can inaugurate, if no farther than just in your own homes and in your own community, a world in which people really do care about one another, where they do try to settle differences by being kindly and friendly and open and receptive to one another, where people really do try to settle things without always seeking the help of lawyers and big business people and all the rest. Could it be that God is saying that I have given my gifts of the Spirit, not just to some king, not just to some ruler, to the hearts of all the faithful, so that they might begin to create a world, certainly not a perfect image of the world that Isaiah speaks of, but at least one that comes a step closer to being something that even approximates or somewhat resembles the world that is prophesied here. In the end, the perfection of this work will only be done by God's hand. But I don't think that God intends us to simply sit down and wait for it. I think he expects us, having given us those gifts, to do something.